The intro.
Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why.
Good evening and welcome to Pause for the Truth. I have to first start making a joke about myself, Dr. Kane, and our guest host, panelist, Randall Jackson. Because Dr. Kane, I've been looking at, we started out, if any of you have been listening to our show, we joked about my hairstyle. And I have to tell you, when I saw the intro and Dr. Kane and saw all my hairstyle, now I know why the joke was on me. But anywho, I digress. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Kane?
I saw that last week, but okay, I digress. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. I think our show is an important one, although kind of difficult to, it may be somewhat difficult to navigate, but we're going to give it our best shot and see what we got.
Indeed.
Well, we are pleased to have joining us tonight, and he is actually serving dual roles because, again, if you've listened to the show in the past, you know our normal behind the scenes guy is Tyrone Jackson, called Tyrone.net, and he comes from behind the scenes sometimes and joins in the discussion. Well, Tyrone is taking a sabbatical this evening, and who else to step in for you than your own son? So tonight we're pleased to have Randall Jackson joining us as the behind the scenes guy who joined on the scene this evening. How are you doing, Randall?
I'm doing great. So it's been a great Tuesday back at the office after a nice long weekend. Got a lot of work done today, so I'm just ready to get into the conversation.
Well, I wanted to call Tyrone today for real because I was having some technological issues, but
Oh yeah,
that's for another day. And of course, I was not able to contact him today. We all deserve a break. But
yeah,
tonight's discussion is actually an important one. And as Dr. Kane and I were talking earlier, I was struggling with it, to be honest with you. And I guess that's because I struggle with generational differences. I know being someone who, yesterday, for example, no, Sunday, a couple of days ago, I took my mother and my nephew to dinner. And it's always interesting to see our dialogue and figuring out. I know I try to make sure I am engaging and I say silly enough that my nephew won't be bored stiff with his old auntie and grandma, right? But
Yeah,
the fact that he generously spends time with us on a regular basis tells me it's not just about the generational differences, but it's about the respect that he has for his family. And so we have to be reminded of that. But Dr. Kane, I'm going to start with you for no, I'm going to start with Randall because I think if not think, and forgive me for saying I think, but if you've listened to the show before, you've
hmm
heard me say that when we decide what topic we're going to choose, we either have that conversation among ourselves or we will ask others. Where we punted it to Randall tonight because he was going to be our technology guy for the night. And we said, Randall, what would you like to talk about? So he gave us a few options and we chose one that we thought would be interesting, but admittedly, it's a struggle for me. And I hope that that is not because I don't know how to communicate with the other generations. Obviously, we all can do better with how we communicate. Randall and I were talking earlier, and listening obviously is one of the skill sets that we should all have when we're communicating with one another. Because sometimes we'll jump to the gun when someone says something, we assume what they're going to say and start saying. And my mama says that people do when she goes to the doctor, they'll start answering a question when she's not finished asking the question, right? And so, sorry, Dr. Kane, nothing against doctors, but she just talked about young people in general don't listen to older people. And so just the respect that people have. So Randall, when we talk about generational differences, right off the top of your head, what does that mean to you, and why was it important for you to for us to talk about that tonight?
What generational differences really means to me is just the disconnect between the different age groups. I mean, kids and teenagers and young adults and adults, and our young adults and older people. So I feel like there's always a little blockage there. Sometimes you don't like your little brother hanging around with you after you
Yeah.
get like 13 and your little brother's 7. It's just like, bro, you're too young. But then you get 21 and now they're a little bit cooler because he's 17 and he can relate. But then you become 27 and they're like 18 and it's like, so it's kind of weird how we teeter-totter back and forth as we get older with our peers, or as some of our peers, um, everyone gets older, no one gets younger. So
What about in the workplace though, Randall? Do you find that, and we won't say in your current workplace because we don't want you to incriminate yourself with your current colleagues, but do you find in other places where you've been that when you see there is a multi-generational of people, that the differences and the disconnect is with the people older than you or the people younger than you, and you're sandwiched kind of in between? Where do you see the breakdown happening the most, in your opinion?
I think the breakdown is definitely with the younger people going into the older generation, because it seems like there's just a wider gap there. I feel
Makes
like
sense.
if I'm working with someone who is a little bit younger than me, it's not a lot of resistance. But if I'm working with someone who's way older than me, there could be resistance, not necessarily negative resistance, more
Right.
so, hey, I bring up a current event that they have no knowledge of, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that Fortnite had Naruto this week. Who is Naruto? So it's just like,
What is Fortnite is what I would say.
right. So like there's a little bit of a disconnect there as the conversation goes on. And 9 times out of 10, the person who doesn't know what's going on, they just check out. Oh yeah, that seems cool. I've heard of it. So like there's not a real connect happening as that happens.
I think that depends on what age you're talking about, what age you're referring to. Because most of
Indeed.
those guys that are over the age of 60 are not going to say, okay, all right. They're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Just like this.
That's literally what they're gonna say. I don't got no clue what
They
you're talking
literally
about.
like, boy, what you talking about? I think one of the things, Ms. Turner, and I don't know if it's taken away from your questions, but one of the things that I was confused with was these different generations. The baby boomers and the Generation X and Z and millennials. But I did find, thanks to some help from some people, I did find some people that some literature that defined it. So I just want to go ahead and say it out front,
Okay.
if that's okay. There's a generation called the Traditionalist, and they were between 1925 and 1945. People born in that age group. Now, believe it or not, Randall, you can kind of shake your head, but I still got patients that fall well into that age group. My mom actually fall into that age group with 1934. And the trick becomes, I mean, not trick, but the thing that one of the issues is that they are the older age group. They tend to have experienced more, but sometimes, even in my generation, when I came along, we didn't value their experience and the knowledge that they gained from those experiences. And we can talk about that a little later. Some of those. The
I
other
feel like
age
that's a
group,
good point, though. I feel like that's a good point, honestly, because I mean that's part of the generational differences. So
it is. But
older
let me go through
people
the rest of it. Let me go through the rest of these age group, and then we can get back to the conversation. Baby boomers, 1946, 1964. I fall in that spectrum. Okay. And they were basically called baby boomers because as soon as World War II ended, everybody came home to a waiting wife, maybe. They had been out what they came on to somebody waiting on them. And babies were being made right and left. That's why they call them baby boom. That was a boom of babies that occurred. But there was a lot of other things occurred at that time. But we can talk about that later. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Those people born in those years. Millennials. And let me back up real quick. Traditionally represent 2% of the population. Baby boomers currently at 25% population of the population. Generation X currently at 33% population. The millennials, who were 1981 to 2000, represent 35%. And then Generation Z, which is 2001 to current, to 2020, they represent 5% of the population. I think that's important because we have to understand the makeup by which we are, the society is enduring. And it also comes to, it will help bring to light some other parts of the conversation that we have. And I'm sure Ms. Turner is just waiting she's just waiting to get to it.
No, but you also wonder I know when I was in past experience in working, people come to work with all sorts of things going on. And I think you and I talked about that, Dr. Kane. I don't know why I keep saying I think, but Dr. Kane, you and I talked about that, how some people are in the sandwich generation. They're having to take care of an aging parent, and they also have their own children that they're taking care of. And so when folks show up to work, it's a lot on an individual to try to have that balance and then come to work and deal with the generations of people at work. I think so. What I like, there I go again with I think. You put a quarter, I'm going to put a quarter in it in a bucket every time I say I
Take
think.
that one and give it to me.
That part I will make sure I won't say anymore. But imagine though that when you are at work or when you're in a place or space and you're trying to communicate to someone what's happening, and you can't because there is clearly a generational difference. If, for instance, Randall, you're a technology guy, and I'm trying to explain to you what my issues are. And nowadays, physicians like Dr. Kane and others, when COVID happened, we're asking a generation of people, the traditional generation, to get on the computer. And I know I have gone on or tried to teach my mom, for example. And for you, Randall, you may think, this is real easy. Why is she not getting it, right? Because I know sometimes I think that way with my mom. Like, we've gone over this 10 times, right? And she still doesn't seem to get it. So we just have to be cognizant of our differences. And what are you finding, Randall, without again disclosing people? What's the one area? Is it technology where you find that there is a generational difference when you're trying to communicate with folks older than yourself?
I feel like the generational differences rears its heads in a weird places. Sometimes it's technology. I work in the technology field, so the older people I'm gonna meet in technology have been in technology since the beginning of it. But what I do notice is how they always, oh man, it used to be like, oh, I remember when.
You good for saying that, right?
They definitely always.
I remember when the fax machine was started.
Like, man, if you could have just seen, so it's always interesting to hear those things. They always have the assumption that you have like a supercomputer and like 5 monitors and like 3 game systems. It's like, nah, I just have one screen too, bro.
I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we do look at discuss what you just said, Randall, is that we, as an individual, I'm about history of myself. In other words, the experiences that I've had, and and so on and so on and so on. What is just being a doctor is the experiences that I had learning being a doctor. So I'm more likely to recant to someone some experiences that I've had, even though that might not resonate with them, because they haven't had those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to people about the party line. They going, what does that mean? And that's a type, I don't know if you familiar with it, but whether your dad talked to you about it. But the party line was the old telephone. Before we had, you go to a certain neighborhood. Well, in each neighborhood, there were multiple people that had one line, and so you can pick up the phone and you go to dial somebody, but somebody else might be using that line in a whole different household. It shows how
historic, right?
For a long time as a
I
kid,
forgot about it until you mentioned it. I'm like, party line, what does that mean?
a lot of time as a kid, we would take, I'm a kid, so we would easily lift the phone off the hook, and we want to listen to all the latest conversation. So Miss Jones may have been talking to Miss Thompson, and they tell them about they talking about Miss Turner or somebody else, and we would just stand and listen until we got caught. And somebody would say, "Who that listening?" And then we'll just hang up the phone. You never admitted who's listening. But I digress. I just was trying to say what we learn from our experiences, we recant later. So we can appreciate a time in which you had a person that, like me, I might have transitioned from the party line, but think about before my time when they didn't have a telephone at all.
Snail mail or just walking down the street. Woo!
Yep, just telling, there's a whole lot of things you can talk about that, like the civil rights movement, how some of those things were able to take place in lieu of not being able to communicate as efficiently as we can these days. But boy, did they gather up the people to bring that to the forefront. But that's historical in itself. And so that means somebody got to talk to you about it for you or you read it to historically appreciate what it is that people are talking about.
I think a big part of it, which we're kind of touching on right now, is being relatable. And I think that's what's gotten hard over time because of the lack of interaction between the generations. There's definitely interaction, obviously, but there needs to be more so the practice of being relatable to one another can get stronger. Because if Dr. Kane can be relatable to me, he can communicate anything he wants to me. But the challenge is Dr. Kane wants to tell me something, he just doesn't know how to relate it to someone my age. But then the question is, how do you become relatable? You got to, immerse yourself in things of that time. I feel like that's the only way to do it.
Well, just like I said, it has to be, not has to be, that, you guys don't recognize historically things that we've experienced. I don't recognize, I may not be as poignant in terms of my recognition of things that you guys, that's making history for you guys today, or just made history, or you appreciate what would be historical appreciation.
And that's why I'm saying we got to do a better job of making things relatable, because you can take your experiences of what you went through and still relate them to what I'm going through. But how you relate them is the key. You can relate them in ways that I might not understand. It's like, hey, I was doing this, I was marching and going to all these sit-ins, whatever, and look what it paved the way to do for you now. Because
what you don't know is what you're going through. Sometimes we need to hear from you guys what you're going through for me to be able to relate to that.
And that's what something me and Ms. Jocelyn touched on before we got on air, is that there's a lot of masks that are worn between the generations. Like, when you go to talk to your grandma or you go talk to your grandson, how was school? What'd you eat last night?
What grade
is your grandson gonna be like, yeah, I'm struggling with this bully at school, grandpa. He keeps locking me in the locker, he's not gonna come out and say that right away.
Tell me where he is. I got it.
You know what I'm saying? Now, if you start running like, man, I remember when I was getting beat up by this one guy, my dad had to take me to karate and I ended up beating up the bully, him telling a story that's relatable to him. He's like, you know what?
Maybe
I'm bullied at school. Is that something that I could do? And that starts that that breakdown of walls, people can start to actually communicate because it's become relatable. He knows that you've dealt with a bully, or even if you tell him that you were a bully and why you were bullying people, that still becomes a relatable antidote that he can be like, you know what I'm saying? That's what more has to happen just across the board on all things. Like you said, there's so much to be said on both parts.
Well, Ms. Turner, you can take up, but one thing I will make sure that we understand, it ain't just the really old and the really young that we're talking about, the intergenerational differences. We had, we got someone that was, the generations that Ms. Turner and I agreed upon, we really wanted to look at was the 40 and below, 40 to 60, and then 60, even though we realize that there's a whole different classifications here, but 60 and above, because what we're looking at, a lot of that, what we're looking at that time is how the household has changed as it relates to that. Ms. Turner, you might have some questions. You're going to head down that road, but.
Well, again, when people go home, I say, I said I didn't think, right.
No, you didn't say I think.
You think about the makeup of households now. In past years, it may have been a mother, father, and the children. Nowadays, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon who you ask, the number of marriages are just not happening as they used to be. So there are households of people who may not look like what we call households. And so people may have a variety of people living in their households. People from other countries, when their family, one set of people family members may move over, and they'll invite their other family members to move over. So you have multi-generations of people living in the household. One thing I want to digress. I want to switch over for 1 second and talk about music. A few weeks ago, we talked about music. I find that a lot of younger people love sampling. So it was interesting when I understood what sampling mean in the music industry. But when they are taking the songs of past generations and infusing it into today's generation, I think those are the most creative. I love when they do that. How do you all feel about that?
I'll let Randall talk first, and then I'll tell you mine.
Me personally, it's okay. I mean, unfortunately, my parents didn't introduce me to music at all, so I don't know about any of the classics or the oldies. I started listening to music until I was like in 8th grade, 2008. So, all those years, no music. Like no music on Sundays, not cleaning up the house, no music. So it's not as cool to me. A lot of people do love it. It's definitely getting a lot more popular. I can't say it's bad though. It's more so new to me. So it's
yeah.
Well,
if you didn't grow up.
One of the things that I can add to this is just going, like you said, we had these guests before that came through and we talked about music and generations of music. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I recognized earlier, I remember way back in probably like 87, 88, there was a lot of talk going around about a new generation of songwriters, or lack thereof. It was no new generation of songwriters coming along. So what we tend to have seen was a lot of people coming in and start sampling some of the music from the previous generation who had a huge
1988. Ooh,
yeah, 1988. I mean, you got to start thinking about like Fat and Whitehead coming out of Philadelphia. They did not have songwriters.
Okay.
But there was nothing going on futuristically for songwriters.
No one was pushing the envelope at that time.
Nobody pushing the envelope. And even now, you don't have the number of songwriters you had before now. Back, like I said, back in 1988. I know that's for young folks, some young folks, that's way back. But that's when you start seeing the differences in terms that helped dictated what Ms. Turner was talking about, and that is dictated. And of course, if I was a specialist like the guys we had before, they can give you more detail. But that's what helped dictated some of the movement that we see in music now. Not to mention rap really.
Evolved.
Not saying it wasn't around before then, but it really flourished at that time because they could sample. They sampled Snoop to death, and then Snoop even sampled somebody like Rick James or James Brown, some of the older.
Brown, the most sampled artist in the world.
Huh?
James Brown's the most sampled artist in the world.
He was, yep. One time
Is that fact?
James Brown.
Is that a fact? Is that true?
I believe so. I can double check.
I never realized that.
Well, one of the groups that used to be was the Average White Band. They were very sampled. There's a lot of groups out there that were sampled quite a bit, and you'd be surprised. And when you're looking at James had a basic rhythm to the music that he had. If you recall, Ms. Turner, the guest we had before, they talked about it. And remember when Obama was running, Reverend Wright out of Chicago? The Reverend Wright talked about how James had this music structured, yada, yada, yada. But I digress on that as well.
What about technology? So
I didn't want to say something more about the music, though, actually. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, go ahead.
But I do always hear the notion is just like, young people's music is so explicit, or it's just so this and that. And I just feel like it's very funny how you can pull up any song from any age and any song today, and the lyrics are
the same.
Parallel. Just different words. I was at a cookout last night, and with the song he was saying, like, what he said, I was like, bro, what he's actually saying is pretty explicit, but he used basic words. He was like, oh man, it's escaping me right now. I was like,
well, history tends to repeat itself, as you know.
Definitely.
And so, that's not surprising. You're sending the same message, just verse or voice differently.
Right, like the Tina Turner song. That's her being a fast woman sleeping around.
Well, but you got to remember. Let me just tell you a couple of things.
Ain't no excuses.
Hold on, what you got to remember is a couple of things. Men and women laying in the bed together was unheard of before 1970.
1970?
Yeah.
Lucille Ball and her husband had twin beds on the I Love Lucy show.
Yeah. All these, you didn't see that because that was the way the FCC helped monitor what was being shown on TV. You didn't see black and white kissing. The first time you saw black and white, a black person kiss a white person, was that Sidney Poitier?
First of all, we're calling each other. Did you see that commercial?
Yeah. Sidney Poitier, and what's the name? What's the name of the movie that made him famous? Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Oh yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, that was the first interracial couple. You just didn't see stuff like that on television. And so young folks these days take it for granted that was always there. But of course not.
I love it how we are schooling Randall on some things. If any of you have any questions, Randall, what's our dial-in number tonight for people to dial in? Do we have one for people to dial in to if they have any questions, want to join in on the discussion? But I want to read something that I read earlier. It was talking about generational differences in texting. It says millennials spend about 48 minutes a day sending text messages. Baby boomers spend about 30 minutes a day sending text messages, which is more than they spend making calls, using the internet, or checking news apps on their phones. About 25% of Gen Z had a smartphone before age 10, and 73% of them today use internet-connected devices primarily for sending text messages and chatting. So it's interesting, the evolution of technology, but just imagine marketers trying to keep up with that as they are trying, now we're going to be seeing commercials starting in the fall soon for Christmas shopping. And all of these different products are going to come about. And we're going to see them on commercials on television, hear them on the radio. They're going to pop up in your feed on social media or wherever you're searching. So it's interesting how when we talk about generational differences, it impacts so many parts of our lives. The way marketers have to decide how to market different products. We talked about it in music. We talked about it in the workplace. We talked about it, Dr. Kane, when you are, I'm sure I know you've said that most of your patients are boomers, right? Boomers or the the traditional generation. So just imagine then that if you all of a sudden, because your younger daughter is now a practitioner at your office, if she says, Dad, I want to bring in a younger population of people, she's on vacation. How is that going to affect you then when Randall comes in and you're trying to communicate? I mean, when you think about it, so having this discussion about the differences in generations is so important because it's so different no matter what different aspects of your lives, right? Wouldn't you agree?
First of all, the one cardinal rule I made is I ain't trying to be hip these days. That's not even a way to phrase it these days. I ain't trying to be hip or attuned to
you stay in your lane.
I think that, I know how to stay in my lane. So I would probably, ain't no probably, I asked them basic things that I need to know for us to get started in conversation. And if I'm talking to them, they say something that I don't understand, I tell them, what do I mean again? Or they may, just like they ask me, Dr. Kane, you talking, gibberish when you start talking medical terms. What does that mean? Okay. And I try to talk to my patients, regardless of the age. I try to talk to them on their level of understanding of, those scientific terms. If it's another doctor I'm talking to, obviously I'm not going to try to break it down to a layman's level. But if it's a layman that I'm talking to, I'm not going to try to speak to them like I'm so great and smart in terms of I'm speaking right off Google or Mayo website in terms, for professionals, in terms of how I discuss things with them. I have to assess who I'm talking to, like I do in everyday life, assess who I'm talking to and see how best I can communicate with them. And if we've had a conversation, I want to make sure at the end of that conversation, I ask them, they got any questions? Do we understand one another? Yada, yada, yada. And go from there. Because I'm going to ask my question. I want to make sure they get an opportunity to ask theirs and I answer them within a level of understanding that they have. Because if I explain something to them and they don't understand, then we might as well not have the conversation. So I want to make sure I get that point across. And you go back to something, and I'm gonna get off of this little something. Go back to something we looked at that last week. That we looked at the last broadcast, in which the future of medicine, is going to be so different, especially because of what we're looking at right now. These whole generational changes that we're looking at. But that's another topic for another time.
So, Randall, what is it? This is your moment. What is it when you talk about generational differences? Is there anything when you thought, well, as you were preparing to come on the show today, was there anything that you said, I wish I could ask somebody older than me, much older than me? Now is your opportunity. You have some much older people on this meeting tonight. What is something that you've been wanting to ask? Like, so tell me, why do you all say this? Or I just want to know about that. Anything come to mind? But not
this
really.
Is a backdoor way of talking to your parents, by the way. But go ahead.
We're older than his parents.
They're not listening at the
generation.
Well, that question specifically for me is hard. I mean, I'm gonna ask you what I'm thinking. So I'm trying to,
Okay.
and I'm really ambitious. See, I'm trying to. I say I want to have a youth super center. That's also a media company. So that's I really wouldn't go to older people for anything that
Gotcha.
I'm trying to do because it's all new
Right.
generation. However, the things that I can learn from them are people skills and how they've maintained relationships over a long period of time. Those things I'm always interested in because how people get to their position isn't always how you think. So it's just like I'm always interested in
Basically,
those
who
kind
you know.
of African American history. I mean, it's just so limitless and not all there. So I'm always seeking that kind of information. I was just asking my wife. I was sitting down watching a movie. I was like, so we were abducted from Africa, blase, blase. How come no one came to get us? Weren't our
Oh
weren't
yeah.
there Africans in power of power? I mean, that they weren't just an awful poor third world country, were they? I don't know. How come no one tried to save us? So just
Well,
things that I just have no idea about.
and
But
and if you go
That's a
back and
fair
you
question.
yeah, but if you go back, I can just give you some of the answer right now. If you go back and you talk to some of the older generation, it may have to get some that are more real well read than others. But what they will tell you is that we sold ourselves.
is that true, or was that what we were told?
Yes, it is true with some of the slave trade related. If somebody came, Africans had slaves themselves. You go and conquer another,
I wonder about that. How did that happen? How were we
you
sold by
go
our
and
own
conquer
people?
another tribe.
What was the deal? I'm just confused. Like, hey,
If
we'll
you go and
give you some gold.
you
There's
got to think,
classism everywhere, right?
you got to
Classism
think
everywhere.
outside. You got to think outside of your current knowledge of communication. Okay, you hadn't come up with a generation that didn't communicate with each other like that. You had different languages. You had um, different villages, and now if you look at Shaka Zulu, and if you ever looked at that, um, there's a movie out about him. I'm not saying 100% correct, but it gives you an idea who he was. You got to go back and look at historical background. And one thing that people don't know, and that's why it ain't just young folks, old. That was the First World War. They want to say occurred in 1910 in that era. That World War One. Then World War II started in the 30s, the late 30s. But did you actually know? A lot of people say the First World War was actually in Africa, in which the European nations went in and all different ones decided to attack Africa, which you look on the map is so poorly represented in terms of its true size.
Oh no,
You know about that. But anyway, they went in the 1880s, 90s, somewhere in there, and actually, France and Spain decided they'd take a certain part of Africa. So they invaded it about the same time timeline that China invaded from their end.
so Africa was inferior.
They went in and just divided the continent.
Africa was inferior. That's what they don't want to say. Africa was inferior, and they just fell to the superior.
Are they still telling you that right now? Africa's.
Well, I always thought it was a lie.
No.
If they just came over there and beat us up and took us, well, that's kind of how the world works.
Yeah, it is, but is it something? Okay, that is what happened. They came over and they had gunpowder. We didn't.
Okay.
Just like with the Indians and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
But if you start looking historically, some of the core of their knowledge was obtained from Africa. We just didn't spread.
All of their knowledge came from Africa.
Northern Africa,
just to renew their knowledge. So
Northern Africa is where most of it came from, the so-called Egypt and that area in there. But that's a whole nother conversation.
All those things are interesting. I never know. No one talks about those things. I don't even know where you can research those things and get real information. And everyone assumes, everyone who talks about it I'm definitely true. I researched it, and it's like always conflicting.
Yeah. Critical race theory is one of the places to start, believe it or not, that you
Yep.
hear so much anti everything these days.
Mhm.
Again, that's part of the generational differences as well. They don't want you to know that because it may give you too great an insight into history.
Interesting.
Looks like we have more to talk about in this series. For those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about generational differences. We all experience it on a daily basis. We experience it at work. We experience it in our own families as we're trying to communicate when we're going out to buy technology or any appliance. Depending upon the person who comes up to us, we experience it when we go to the doctor's office. Dr. Kane has talked about his experiences. Think about those times or those occurrences where you have had a generational divide or difference, and how did you get through it? Post a question right now, ask us so that we can talk about it. We'd like to hear your point of view of or what has happened in your life. The main thing I'd like for us to take away from this discussion is that there are differences in generations, and it's okay. But it's also an opportunity for us to remind ourselves to, as Randall and I said, to listen, to speak, to be understood, and to give the person an opportunity to express themselves so that they can understand. Because if they're trying to communicate about something that is new to them, obviously that's going to be different. Dr. Kane talked about the way the world, or that may be within the United States, the different generations. There are more people in certain generations of people. I think which generation, Dr. Kane, had the
But there
most?
was two of them that split. They kind of split in close proximity, and that was the Generation X and the Millennials. They both were around 33 to 35%. But also baby boomers, they were at 25%. The difference is we dying off being baby boomers. We're dying off. So our numbers will not increase unless there's a catastrophic something that happens to younger folks, catastrophic wise. The baby boomers are going to be a steady decline because we will be dying off. We're a dying generation. Whereas the Generation X and millennials will continue to be significant part of the population, only to be overtaken by Generation Z at some point in time, because that's the newest generation. Before we get off, I would like for us to.
We have a question, Dr. Kane.
Okay, go
A
ahead.
comment. Someone says, I am at the cusp of the baby boomer generation and Generation X, born in 67, and would buy Randall a gift card if he would come to my classroom and troubleshoot my printer. Obviously, a teacher who's having a struggle right now, Randall. So you see what I mean? It just depends. And thanks, Von Brown, for that comment. So you see that, and I also was having, I shared with you all, I was having a technology issue, and it was definitely a disconnect when I'm trying to tell the guy that I was talking to, explain to him what was happening. So what I decided to do, Randall, rather than try to explain, I pulled my camera out and took a picture of the screen and sent it to him. So like, this is what was happening with my computer. And then that way, now he knows what to do tomorrow when I get to the office, because I could not explain to him what was happening. And I knew he was going to ask me. So I thought in advance, let me just go ahead and take a picture of it. Now, Randall probably would have pressed control, whatever on the, I'm not that familiar with the control function keys to know what copying doing a screenshot of the the computer screen is. But on a serious tip, tonight's conversation was we're talking about generation. And Dr. Kane, you've shared, and Randall, I don't know what your knowledge or experience is, because mine is very limited. Dr. Kane has talked to me about artificial intelligence. And I know I was watching, what is it, America's Got Talent, and I saw a very unique example of technology when the gentleman these two guys created this technology where they can take guys of today and use some, different group of guys and put somebody else's face. And what they did, they put Simon Cowell's and Howie Mandel and Terry. They they put their faces on these other guys, and they were singing opera. It was hilarious, and that's what they were saying about the use of technology. The future of it, quite frankly, it scares me because we're already, and that might sound exciting. It was funny, but how scary is that though?
Well, that was one of the topics that I wanted you guys to get into. That when we start talking about generational differences, this is 1 hour is too short a time for us to get into it. But somebody mentioned earlier when they say, I'm not sure how and I believe it was you, Randall, how they could come up with all this information and be able to discern this, that, or the other. And artificial intelligence is one of the ways they're able to do that, in which these computers, without getting into too much details, these guys can, those computers can take and analyze in microseconds and seconds that it might take us 3 weeks, 4 weeks to deal with as an individual, and even as a group of people, still take quite a bit of time, because we all have to try to rely on the human mind to remember certain facts and connect those facts in a timely fashion. Whereby, when you're looking at artificial intelligence, those guys have the benefit of, depending on what the network is, thousands of computer computations that can help bring up a conclusion that would have taken us forever in a day to do it.
Right.
And Randall, you can comment on that.
I mean, and the analogy that I've always heard is that a supercomputer can fly across a lawn and count every blade of grass accurately, even though we could go on a lawn and count every blade of grass. It would just take a long time, and we'd probably get distracted.
Yeah, and mess it up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, depends on your level of focus. There's some people who can remember up to like 45 bits of information. So it just depends. But more times than not.
You made one statement, and that is some people can remember up to XYZ. The human brain capacity, I forgot what they said in terms of terabytes.
It's not a question of ability. It's just a question of experience.
I'm talking about capacity, that they've determined that the human brain in itself has a certain level of capacity. Obviously, there are some that got a lot greater capacity than others, because I met some people.
Well, no, the human brain has unlimited capacity. It's just, like I said, it's never a question of ability. That's why I say it like that. It's not a question of ability. It's about what you do.
Now, I look at what I saw was, in memory, there is a limited amount of capacity for the brain up to a point.
I thought it was up to 9 bits of information, give or take.
Whichever way it may be, I'm just saying. There's a limit to it.
A lot. A bit of information will be one word.
Quite a bit. But think about a computer that instead of using a memory disk or something like that, uses DNA as its memory storage capacity.
Well, the computer is just focused on one thing. Our brains are processing trillions of things simultaneously. What we hear, what we think, feel, see, and everything. Whereas a supercomputer is whatever is laser focused on. It's just counting the graphs.
Not thinking for itself. I agree with you.
Yeah,
but that's the scary part. I think that Ms. Turner says that she's afraid of, because they are trying to work on computers that have that are self-thinking,
I think we're very far away from it, even though everyone says that people they have computers that created their own language and we don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, whatever.
I mean, that's a language. We have 5 senses that we're constantly processing 24/7. I don't think we're there yet.
And that brings us into the arena of medicine in the future, and the different generations, how they may use what we know and will be knowing and access to medicine different.
Right. Like, how do you guys feel about growing a baby in the bag?
What?
Growing a baby in
a bag outside of the womb completely.
Yeah. I'm not thrilled about it. No,
Neither am I.
you know, I mean, but I'm old, as they say, and I
Right.
got
I
older.
mean, this might
No,
be
what Randall and I concluded, we should say we're from a different generation of
Yes,
thinking instead of
yes,
saying I'm
right.
old.
That might be a real reality for me. My son might be like, Dad, my baby is being created in a bag. I'm gonna be like, so what's the baby's name? So you know,
and,
it's
and
gonna be
wait a
a
minute,
different
and then
time.
and then if that was his grandma, like, oh no, that's blasphemy. Come on,
Well, and I just watched a video on this. You know, babies are already grown outside of the room already, just not full term. So after 12 weeks, there's a lot of cases where babies are grown outside of the
they
room.
implant them. Yeah, I mean, you know, they can be artificial.
It's not uncommon. It's just not talked about. It's
Well,
actually
yeah,
something going on.
artificial insemination, and they may grow it up to a point, and then they implant it in a receptacle womb. You know that the mother of the donated eggs may not be able to have a baby themselves, but they go and get somebody compatible that they can implant that fertilized egg in, and the baby can, you know, move on. But they may, like you said, grow it in a petri dish first, and then move forward after that.
The generational differences that come from that. Woo.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be mind blowing. But before we go too further, Ms. Turner, I did want to just kind of talk real quick, and we can get back to it later down the road. Medicine. I mean, not medicine. The generational differences and the workplace. We did not get we've been talking in general, and that's why we talk when we talk about a series, we may have to get specific with some things.
Mm-hmm.
But Ms. Turner, did you have anything that you were going to go into? You may have in the workplace and generational differences.
No, just Randall's example was a good one when he talked about the guys that said, "Oh yeah, back in the day we used to do such and such, and you guys don't know." And I remember our generation, Randall would say, "You cats don't know anything about that." I always wonder why guys refer to
Oh,
each
y'all
other as
know about
cats.
that?
Right? Y'all don't know nothing about that, right? So we're good with saying that. What I learned tonight from this discussion, to be honest with you, is the importance of not discounting or making a point a big deal. No, he doesn't know anything about it, right? There's an opportunity that we could take advantage of to share. That is so, by simply saying, wow, that's interesting. I remember years ago when such and such, right? We look at the evolution, and I'll go back with music. Look at the evolution of music, 8-track tapes, cassette tapes, CDs.
Oh, you left out vinyl records, which is where
Right,
it started.
records. Yep.
And you
So,
still get paid the most for it still to this day.
And I still got some, by the way, but okay.
Okay,
but
I see.
but you think about the evolution of music and how we.
Finals are cool.
My mom will say, "Can you buy me that record?" No, but I can buy you the CD, right?
No.
Or
I can put it on Spotify.
my mom doesn't know anything about Spotify.
No.
Barely understands. Barely understands when I talk about Sirius Radio when I'm playing the old stage Soul Town or whatever it is, where it's the music of her generation. When she and my 87-year-old aunt get in my car, I'll tune into that station, and they were like, "Oh, where's that? What station is that? I can't get that on my radio, right?" So it's funny when you really are dealing. But guess what? This has been an interesting conversation. We're at the end of the hour. Love the discussion. We obviously can talk about it from so many different angles, as Dr. Kane brought up when we talk about generational differences. At the end of every show, we like to give our guests an opportunity to share your final thoughts. Randall, first of all, thank you for joining us on tonight's show. It was interesting. We've talked in the past about having a younger person to join us on the show to give a different perspective. Having you on the show tonight piqued my curiosity to let me know, oh my gosh, what else are we missing out on by not including someone younger than us. So, Randall, take it away. What are your final thoughts on generational differences?
I think the biggest thing that all age groups can do to connect with other age groups is find ways to be relatable. I think just sharing your daily everyday experiences. I mean, people say, "Oh, just be true to yourself," but sharing those experiences with those people in different age ranges, it'll allow them to search the Rolodex for things that can possibly relate. If you're into music, keep talking about music. Sooner or later, Dr. Ken's gonna be like, "Hey, isn't that such and such?" And then you guys can start to relate and then start to break down walls. So I think the name of the game is being relatable, and to be relatable, you got to have conversation about what's going on today. I mean, I think that sums it all up for me.
Thank you. That's awesome. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to add on to what Randall said, and that is, in addition to what he said, one of the things that I want to make sure happen is that not just we speak to other generations, we listen to other generations. It's time that everyone listen to someone else and still have room to voice their concerns and opinions. But a lot of times, as we started out with the show, they don't listen. They want to prejudge or predetermine what you're referring to and give that person an opportunity to speak to whatever it is that they have concerns about, and not assume that it all the time is going to relate exactly to what you did back in yesteryear or vice versa. But listen to what that individual, male, female, whomever it may be, listen to what it is that they have to say. And then if you have questions, ask them questions. If you have statements after you've listened, then you go on ahead and make your statement, because that may lead to another question. We didn't get into the workplace, which I think at some point, whole work ideas and work ethics, that's a whole nother topic of conversation in terms of youth and so on and so on. And then the last thing I'm going to put in will be that not only do we want to hear from young folks when we do our broadcast, but we are actually looking to having a second hour at some point, to where young folks are going to be the ones to help lead that second hour into conversations that we may have started on this hour. Like now, we started a conversation, and then it might be some younger folks decide they don't want to listen to old man Kane and young lady Turner. See, I know better. Young lady Turner, they may want to listen to the youngest person on the crew, and that is Randall and someone else, yada, yada, yada. So I do think that we should make sure that people get to understand, and then that's an opportunity for us to learn, because you and I are expressing concerns that we have about communication, but we don't have the answers necessarily to those concerns. And it may be that other people, young folks like Randall and any other individuals that we bring forth on help bring forth to the Powerful the Truth Network enterprise, that they can help us navigate through those differences.
Thank you, Dr. Kane, and thank you again, Randall. Tonight's discussion was an important one. As we all know, one of our listeners just said, I agree, listening and respecting the various generations is the key. That is the key. If we think about the various aspects of our lives at home, at work, when we're out navigating, going to restaurants or different places, we're all going to come across folks who are different ages than we are. But the main key, the main point that we've talked about tonight is, and Randall said it, just finding that thing that's relatable. When you said that, Randall, what came to mind for me is the importance of having those family reunions. family reunions was the opportunity for generations to come together. It taught folks to respect their elders. It taught folks to learn and listen from one another from different generations. Unfortunately, so many people don't do those anymore. But I'd like to challenge our listeners to consider organizing your family reunion. Start small and grow. One of my friends, I always admire her, both sides of her family, mother and father side of her family. They do family reunions on a regular basis. And you see the importance of that. As always, thank you to our listeners or viewers if you're watching us. Tune in next week on Pause for the Truth as we talk about another topic of importance, not only to you, but others. And please help us grow our podcast audience by sending a reminder before you tune in next week to Pause for the Truth, because we start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, that's Pause for the Truth. If you have any show ideas or topics that you'd like for us to talk about, email us info@pauseforthetruth.com. Thank you as always. Thank you, Randall, for utilizing not only your in front of the camera experience, but also your experience from the technology side and giving your dad a break tonight. And good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.